Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's lecture. This week we begin the book Life Undocumented with the first two chapters. And the book Life Undocumented, the author Edelina Burciaga, in case you didn't know, she is actually a professor here at CU Denver in the sociology department, and she's been serving this year as the chair of the ethnic studies department. So I encourage you to look her up for any future courses she might be teaching. So in the first chapter, she is talking about legal ecologies. This is the term she uses. And the book is a comparative study of undocumented youth in California and Georgia. By local ecologies, she's talking about the local laws in each state that undocumented youth must navigate. And she's looking at how, both in Georgia and California, the respective laws in each state impact the experiences of undocumented youth. And so her argument is that we can't look at the experiences of undocumented youth as a similar or national experience, but that undocumented youth experience is very depending on what the local anti-immigrant laws are. And so she's looking at California as a traditional immigrant gateway and Georgia as a new destination. So this is the image that she shares in the chapter of sort of the different levels of experience that impact these young people. So you have the federal context, which are the federal laws, the state context. And so these are the state level laws that may exist. The local context, which may be at the city level, but also what the attitudes are, what the communities look like, what kind of hostility they're experiencing. Then there's the familial level, right, of illegality, whether they are part of mixed families where some people might be undocumented in the family and others not. And then there's the individual illegality itself of what is the individual status that the young person has. So she looks at California as a traditional gateway because of the history of California and having a very large presence of Mexican immigrants going all the way back to before the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, when California was a part of Mexico. She talks about the consistent immigration there's been from the 1920s to California from Mexico. And how following the passage in 1986 of the Immigration and Reform and Control Act, which included a pathway to citizenship, 55% of undocumented immigrants in California were legalized. The recession in California in the 1990s resulted in an anti-immigrant backlash and passage of anti-immigrant laws, including Proposition 187, which sought to deny access to public services to all undocumented immigrants. By the 2000s, however, these laws have changed. The environment towards immigrants in California has changed, making it known as a more welcoming place for undocumented immigrants. Atlanta is the new destination where the immigrant population increased starting in the 1990s when that recession hit in California and people started looking for other places where they could find economic opportunities. And at the time, Georgia was offering new opportunities, particularly in poultry processing, construction, and the service sector. But this increase in immigrant population in a state where this wasn't something that they were used to experiencing led to hostility towards immigrants, as seen in how they're treated in public places like parks, raids that have taken place in workplaces and in neighborhoods, and regular patrols of immigrant neighborhoods. So this kind of environment is going to have a different impact on undocumented youth in that area than they would experience in California. She also covers at the federal level. What are the federal laws that are impacting these young people? So in 1982, Plyler versus Doe Supreme Court case granted undocumented children the right to K through 12 public education. And so this meant that all undocumented children are allowed to attend public schools through K through 12 throughout the United States. But what this has resulted in is creating an uncertain future after these young people graduate from high school. Um, and so the DREAM Act was introduced in 2001, which would create a pathway to citizenship from undocumented youth. But this act has failed every time it has been introduced to Congress since 2001. And so this led in 2012 for President Obama to create DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, as sort of a relief for these young people, even though it wasn't an actual immigration act that would have a long-term permanent kind of solution. But this grants a 2-year stay of deportation. They are eligible to apply for work authorization, and it is renewable. Of course, under the Trump administration, this program has come under a lot of scrutiny and is basically now in sort of this uncertain kind of space. Renewal requests have been processed, but new applicants are no longer eligible to apply. And so there's this sort of uncertainty around the future of this program, which also adds to the anxiety and stress and uncertainty of the future for young people. In California, in terms of state level laws, in the last few years, this is a sort of a picture of what the laws are like that make that state a little bit more welcoming for undocumented youth. So all undocumented immigrants are allowed to get driver's licenses in California. E-Verify, which is a platform for employers to use to verify what the legality of their employees, is optional for employers. They're not required to use it. There is no statewide English language law, so this allows for Spanish language documents, translations, and so on to be available to people. Undocumented students are allowed to pay in-state tuition for public universities in California, and they are also eligible for state and institutional financial aid for these students. And they are also allowed to have professional licenses. So for example, if you are any profession that requires a license, like cosmetology, being a lawyer, etc., you are allowed to get those licenses in the state of California and therefore practice those professions. The picture looks a bit different in the state of Georgia. In 1996, a law was passed making English the state's official language. HB 87 was passed in 2011, making it a misdemeanor to be undocumented, and it requires employers to use E-Verify. Driver's licenses are only allowed for DACA recipients. Professional licenses are not allowed for anyone at all. Students must pay out-of-state tuition for state universities, and they're not allowed to go to every state university available to them in Georgia. Students are banned from applying to the top-tier Georgia universities. So you can imagine how these set of laws in Georgia make life a little bit more challenging for undocumented youth there. So what are some of the impacts of these anti-immigrant laws? Obviously, fear and anxiety over deportation of themselves or their family members. And you'll see throughout the chapter sort of some of these young people talking about these fears that they have about what may happen to them or what may happen to their parents, particularly when they're in mixed families. They aren't able to drive safely to work or school because they can't get driver's licenses. Only those who have DACA can get a driver's license, but that means that those that do not within their same family are basically driving illegally if they're driving. And so the danger that comes with that of being able to drive safely if you get stopped for a routine, but what normally be a routine, you could be deported. Travel obviously is an issue. You can't leave the country. You hear anecdotally of a lot of people who aren't able to attend funerals in their countries of origin because they can't leave the country. And of course, employment is a challenge, right? Finding employment as an undocumented person can be a challenge, as well as work, even when you do get those jobs, like working in the poultry industry, for example, then you are fearful of any workplace raids that may happen. The reading also talked about what this experience is like for young people from the time they arrive here, going to school. And school is especially important for young people because if you're going to school from K through 12, school is the main place where you're basically being socialized as to be an American, right? To know what to expect of your life here. And so depending on where you go to school, whether it's California, a state like California or a state like Georgia, this experience is also going to look different. So in California, the larger population of undocumented people made the youth feel safer, sort of a safety in numbers kind of thing. They didn't feel out of place living in predominantly Latinx neighborhoods and attending predominantly Latinx schools. There wasn't as much stigma around being undocumented because there was a good chance that a lot of people they were surrounding themselves with were also undocumented. Transition to school was made easier with the presence of ELL courses and Spanish-speaking teachers and staff. So it wasn't as alienating when these young children arrived to a school in California because there are people there that can help them through that transition and through that language barrier. In Atlanta, a lot of the immigrant families were the first ones to arrive to the area, to the particular neighborhood. So they're not necessarily arriving, or weren't, especially in the 1990s, they weren't arriving to established Latino neighborhoods like those that were arriving in California were. So this adds to the feeling of alienation and isolation. Families are also impacted economically due to workplace raids. They feel unsafe to disclose their undocumented status to their friends or to people in school. And transition to school was harder due to the lack of experience working with immigrant children by school staff and also the lack of Spanish-speaking teachers and staff. The author also talked about this concept of racist nativism, which is a racial ideology that relies on the racist belief of white superiority and the nationalist belief in the superiority of native-born Americans. And in the chapter, you have some of the young people, particularly in Georgia, where they are exposed to some of these kinds of images and this kind of rhetoric and how they led them to feelings of shame and embarrassment for youth in Georgia. And this cartoon that I include here demonstrates how this idea of racist nativism has been part of the United States history from its inception, pretty much. So you see the first panel talks about 1780 and sort of these ideas around Papist immigrants, which they meant Catholics, are ruining the economy, and a wall needs to be created and we need to exclude these particular people. In 1850, the same exact rhetoric is being used against Chinese immigrants. In 1920, now we have the same kind of attitude being said and being expressed towards Jewish people. And of course, now we have once again the same rhetoric, but now focusing on Mexicans. This idea that they're ruining our economy for being here and coming here, and that we must get rid of them or we must build a wall. So as you can see, this is not new. This kind of ideology is something that has basically been part of this country since its very beginning. And so it's important to understand that there's this what we're seeing today is a part of a much bigger, much longer history, and that it has a particular kind of impact on young undocumented people. So this ends the lecture for today. I will see you all next time.